you to agree with this. It's totally irrelevant, okay? The things that we're going to be talking about around here we call the teaching ideas. They are called that because it is said that they come from a higher intelligence than man. No one claims to have originated them. Everyone who talks about them says that it comes from some other intelligence than man. No, that's all right. Find the seat. Make yourself at home. So, it is not asked that you believe them. Okay? I'm probably going to say a lot of things that will sound rather strange tonight. What is asked is that you stop the mind's habit of agreeing and disagreeing with everything that it hears. Both of these are to not hear what is said. If you agree with what I say, then you didn't hear it. It means that you filed it away in the brain with a bunch of stuff that you already believe you know. But not to be offensive, but if you really knew that stuff, you wouldn't be here. Okay? You would be out doing the things that we're talking about tonight. And if somebody invited you to such a meeting, you would say, why? And if you disagree with them, it's obvious that you didn't hear them. But most people don't understand that they don't hear things also by agreeing with them. What is asked of you is that you simply call them an idea, which may be true to the speaker, but to you it is an opinion. The minute you get it, it becomes opinion. And that you hold it until the proper time comes when you can check it out for yourself. What is said about the teaching ideas is that they only have an effect on a person if the person finds out for themselves. So it's not enough just to be told. You have to actually find out for yourself whether it's true. In other words, the very act of finding out for yourself that it's true changes you. It's said that one that works with these ideas becomes an entirely new kind of person. So if that's what we want, is to be a different kind of person than the one we are now, then the way to work with them is this, okay? I neither agree nor disagree. Even if it sounds like something I know, I say, I don't know. It's just an opinion. And one day I will find a way to check it out and see if it's true. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight, we may not have the opportunity to check out for some time. Because some of it is kind of out there. Okay? Some of it we can begin checking out immediately. But some of it perhaps we will not be able to. So we just have to say, okay, this is an interesting opinion. I'm going to see if I can find out for myself that maybe these ideas come from a higher intelligence than this wacko who's telling me about them. And experiment with them when I have the opportunity to see if they're true. Okay? Does that make sense? I'm not trying to discourage questions, you understand. If you don't understand something, then feel free to ask questions. Just interrupt, I don't care. But I am not going to get involved in an argument about whether I'm right or wrong. Because I'm perfectly content with what I know about these things. And I really don't care whether you believe me or not. Okay? So I probably will not argue about whether they're right or wrong. I will perhaps maybe try to explain it a little better if you're having trouble understanding it, though. They're not my ideas, so what do I care? There are a few things that we've been told that I want to look at tonight. I'm not saying these are the only things we've been told that we need to look at, but there are a few things I want to look at to start off with that are incredible lies that we've been told about life on planet Earth that's caused the most ridiculous ideas to be set up, all based on lies. And if you understand reasoning just a little bit, you know that if you start with a lie, nothing that you reason from that point on is going to make any sense, isn't that right? That's all it takes is one lie, and we're going to look at several. So you start to understand that the way that we look at living here is just flat out wrong, if you can sort of check these ideas out. The first one is that the creation is finished. That is one of the things that we have been told and believe, isn't that right? That the creation is finished, and now what happens is people get born into it. Isn't that what you've been told so far? It's not true. In fact, the very story that many people use to demonstrate that the creation is finished makes it very clear that it is not. Remember that old story that says that the Creator spent 6 days creating the universe? You've heard that story before?
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of people who have big arguments about that, because it's obviously silly. Isn't that right? Because if you buy that story, then it means that mankind should only be a few thousand years old, and therefore the entire universe should be a few thousand years old. Isn't that right? It should be a few thousand years old plus 5 days. And it's not. So you have to believe in this really kind of prankster, capricious, bizarre guy who said, I'm going to trick him. I'm going to make it so it looks really old. Boy, is it going to boggle their minds. I mean, that's ridiculous, isn't it? It doesn't seem to occur to anybody that maybe his days aren't the same as the amount of time it takes to Earth to rotate around the little sun in the midst of the creation. But he's got a whole different concept of what a day is. Obviously, his days are trillions of years long, from our point of view. I mean, it's just a simple thing, isn't it? Okay, he said it took him 6 days. I'm not going to argue with him. He was there. I wasn't. But it's real clear he didn't mean the kind of day that I know about. All right? Now, if we can accept that simple little thing, that when he said it took him 6 days, we'll accept that he's just telling the truth, and that we can see how that could be true. That obviously we don't live on the same time scale, and that's fine. Then what's the rest of the story? That he said on the 7th day he took rest. Well, that was kind of like just after he created man, isn't that right? So if a day is trillions of years long, do you suppose that the 7th day is still going on? Does that sound about right? Mm-hmm. That you and I will never see the end of his 7th day? So the creation is not finished. He's just resting. But we've all bought. A bunch of people told us that what that story means is that it took him 6 days to do it, and then he took off and said, let's see whether you guys make it to heaven or hell. I'll see you later. But I'm out of here. Another possible way of looking at it is that he's just taking a day off. And it's not done yet. And that actually what's going on is that he expects us to finish it. What a bizarre concept, huh? That he didn't just make us as this kind of little joke to see whether or not he had a bunch of people to torture for eternity, and a few that he could take off to some special place and congratulate them that they missed that other terrible fate. But that there is something for us to do. That we have a place in all of this. Okay? Kind of a little different take on some things that we've known all of our lives in one form. One of the consequences of that is that I believe that I'm incomplete. Isn't that about right? Just about everybody that I met has this feeling inside themselves that there's something missing, that they're not quite finished. Well, that's because it's true. But of course we've been told that everything is done, so it doesn't make sense to us. How can this be? If I'm finished, then how come I feel like something is missing? And so we've made up all sorts of bizarre things out of that to try and deal with this contradiction. Now there's an old saying amongst folks who deal with these ideas that everything in this world is a parable of something in the inner world, which means it is similar but not the same. And it's sitting out here acting similar so that you can see something inside here. That everything out here is a reflection of something that's going on in our inner worlds, okay? So we have this lovely parable sitting in the midst of the outer world, because that's the way it was made, so that we could sort of catch on, you know, of a way to feel complete. You know what that is? Well, I know you do. Sex. Haven't you ever had that feeling in the middle of the sex act that for one little instant you feel complete? You feel like you've joined with someone else and you are complete for that instant. What is that there for? To tell you that the reason you feel incomplete is because part of you is missing. And in that occasional, it doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally in the sex act, you get that sense of union with the other person, and it says what you're missing is something in you, another presence in you that you normally don't ever experience. Isn't that right? And the sex act makes it really clear. Now, rather than dealing with this and saying, oh, okay, that's useful information now, at least I have some idea of what to do to deal with this incompletion, we decided to counterfeit it and say, no, you missed the point. That is completion. To bond with another person in this romantic way, and then you will be complete and your life will be perfect. And so we've made this big, mysterious, mystical thing out of what? Reproduction. We've turned a simple, necessary thing about being in a body into this gigantic, mystical thing where you have to do it certain ways or you'll miss out on the point of it, and you have to do it only under certain conditions and at the right time with the right person, and all this weird stuff, because we decided that we did not want to see that this was just a parable, to point out where we were to look for completion. Not in sexual union, because, I mean, geez, you can't walk around doing that, every damn second of the day, can you? But it at least tells you what's missing, a presence in your life of something else. Isn't that right? It doesn't say this is the way to get it. It just says what it is that's missing. So we've come up with all these weird ideas, that there is one other person out there who is your other half. Because when I do find somebody and I get that, it's temporary and it goes away, and maybe I never get it with that person again, so I say, whoops, they were the wrong one. So there's one person out there that is your soulmate, your other half. And my favorite little way of saying this is now all you have to do is go through 3 billion frogs to find a princess. Isn't that right? I mean, what a needle in a haystack game that is. It's goofy, isn't it? Because we missed the point. So we don't know what it is that would complete me. And many of us have tried to pretend that it's not even true. Many of us have made the mistake of thinking that it's in a romantic sexual union with someone. And many of us have simply decided to say, it's not even true. I feel incomplete, but it's just, because I'm not strong enough or knowledgeable enough or whatever, okay? And that if only I had more of strength and knowledge or whatever, was more successful, whatever, then this would go away. But it is just a fact. I'm incomplete. I'm unfinished, just as the entire creation is. It is my job to finish myself, because he's taking a rest. The Creator is on a break. And the beauty of this game is that by being a part of my own creation, I become like the Creator, do I not? I become a creator by creating myself to begin with. So the old promise that says that if you play the game the way I set it up, this is the Creator speaking, then you will become like me, is just that, a promise. It's not just a funny story that people tell. It's what he said. Now if we look at a human being, we can see very clearly what the part is that is missing, that makes us feel incomplete. And the joke is it's not actually missing. That's actually the good part. Because if it were really missing, I don't know, I think we'd have a real hard time dealing with this. But if we look at a human being, we see that a human being has a physical body. That's the obvious part. Okay. And it has what most of us call mind, but around here we use a technical word called awareness for that. Because what people call mind is what I call a radio that doesn't have an off switch. And that is not exactly what I mean when I say awareness, okay? The awareness certainly is aware, amongst other things, of the ongoing noise that comes from the mind, isn't it? But it is not the mind. It's mind in another sense than the way we think about it. There's all this yammering that goes through the head, okay? It is the part of me that experiences all the stuff that's going on. Okay? In other words, a part that says I. And there is another part of me that I am completely unaware of that we normally call the biological aspect of man, because we don't see that just as I am an invisible spirit called awareness that lives in a physical body, there's yet another invisible spirit that lives in here with me, that runs the body, because I sure don't do that. I have no idea how this body works. I don't know how to use it in the sense of doing all the dirty details. I just know how to say what I want to do, isn't that right? And I have no idea how it gets done. I say, well, I'm going to talk to some people tonight, and I have no idea how to make the mouth move and the larynx work and the air go in the right way. I just don't know how that works. I probably couldn't even give you a good description of it. But this other part that shares this experience of being a human being with me knows exactly how to run the body. Why? Because it made it. This is the Creator. Around here we call it X, to remind ourselves that we don't know nothing about it. It's an unknown to us. We've heard rumors about it. We've heard stories about it. But we obviously know nothing about it because it shares every moment with me. Everything that I say I want to do, it actually does. Not me. In the last few hundred years, we've made up some interesting stories about autonomic nervous systems and things like that, which is called begging the question, isn't it? We still have no idea how all that stuff works, but we found some mechanisms that make us believe that it's all automatic So we don't need the presence of the Creator in that form to make it work. It never seems to occur to us that maybe the Creator's kind of lazy. And so he put a lot of automatic functions in there so that all he had to do is kind of like push a button and the rest did itself, you know. But still somebody's got to push that button. Okay. So part of the teaching is a description of the way that, we call this sometimes, by the way, the life principle. Because it is very clear when it is in matter, isn't it? And it's very clear when it ain't. When X leaves a body, it's pretty obvious because it kind of like falls down and starts smelling bad, falls apart. Doesn't do what living bodies do anymore. See, this is life itself, in other words. It's whatever that unknown thing is that we really don't know, do we? That when it's present in a body, we say that body is alive, and when it takes a hike, we say we have an unpleasant chore. Okay? And the teaching tells us that the way that these bodies work is that they exist in some sort of environment. The body is constantly sensing what is going on in that environment and reporting it to the awareness. Isn't that right? Everything that the body senses is just passed on to the awareness. That's called reporting. And last I heard it says, okay, I felt this, I smelled this, I saw this. But it's the awareness that actually deals with all that information, isn't it? Not the body itself. This invisible spirit that inhabits the body is what actually deals with all the information that comes from the senses, okay? And there is a certain amount of sensory stuff that comes from inside the body that does not tell me about the environment, tells me about the body itself, which is actually another kind of environment as far as I'm concerned. This body is my environment, really, isn't it? But there's a little bit of information that comes inside. Thank goodness it's very rudimentary. It says things like, this doesn't feel okay, or this does. Isn't that about right? That's about all you get. You don't get details. Not like you do out here. Out here you get all these details about what's going on. In here it just sort of says, well, it seems to be working pretty good today. And then a little while later it says, well, the stomach's empty, why don't you do something about it? That's about all it tells you, isn't that right? Thank goodness. It's hard enough dealing with all the information about out here without dealing with all the stuff that goes on in here. I'm real glad it's just real simple stuff. Okay? Means I can deal with out here. And the awareness, according to the teaching ideas, has two things that it is to do with this information. One is to decide what is true because the senses are not perfect. Just because I sense something does not make it so. Okay? You can have the sensory impression that little buggies are crawling on your body, can't you? That doesn't mean they're there, does it? Many times you go to brush off buggies and you look down and there's nothing there. Isn't that right? And that's not even talking about bigger things like the senses telling us that the world is flat when it's not. So the awareness is to check everything out that comes through the senses and say, is it true? How can I deal with my environment if I don't know what's true? So that's the first job of the awareness, isn't it? And the second job is to say what is valuable about it. Now, the way that we normally do that is we decide whether what I'm sensing is good or bad, isn't that right? But the idea is that I put some kind of value on this. So if I sense that the light is kind of gone, I put some value on it, and the next thing you know, I'm turning on a light or lighting a fire or something because I decided I wanted light. That's called valuing. And the way it actually works is that anything the awareness says is both true and valuable is reported to X. The awareness has now done its job. It's been aware. It said, I accept that this sensory impression is true, and here's the value that I put on it. Maybe the value is I want it to change. Maybe the value is I really like this. Maybe the value is I want it to go away. Okay, but there's always some kind of value on it, isn't that right? And just for your information, when this value is put on it, we then get what is known as a feeling or an emotion. That is our feedback about the kind of valuing that we put on this moment. If I feel good emotionally, it means that I'm valuing this moment very highly. When I feel bad, it means I wish it would sort of go away. I don't like it too much. But anytime we make a value decision about something, we always get a feeling. Okay? That's just the way these bodies work. And that feeling is actually what communicates to X, not the thinking of the awareness. Because a lot of times there is some thought that goes into this, isn't there? I may think about what I'm sensing for a while to see if it's true. I may think about a way to value it. But what X hears is the feeling that happens when that value decision is finally made. It doesn't hear all the thinking. Thank goodness. Can you imagine how nuts he would go? Yeah, listen to all that. And then what happens is that X acts. So we say that X then does the appropriate thing for what the information said, or what the awareness said is true and valuable. But that, of course, isn't the way we experience it, is it? I believe that I decide to walk, and so I walk. I don't see this other invisible spirit in my life that I'm in constant communion with, saying, here's what's going on in my world, here's what I care about, that does everything for me because I don't know how. That's invisible to me. It's going on every single second. You've probably heard before that some people have said that God is as close to you as your next breath. Why? Because he's going to breathe it for you. I know people have tried to make really mystical things out of this. Well, let's see. There's this prana, this energy that floats around in the air, and when you breathe it in, it gets you close. No, it's real simple, okay? He's the one who breathed. You don't got to make up mystical energy in the air that connects you with God and all this sort of stuff. It's just, they said that because who do you think is doing the breathing? Not you. In fact, most of the time, I bet you aren't even aware that you're breathing. If it were left up to you, you'd suffocate. Thank goodness he knows how to pay attention better than we do. So this says X does the appropriate thing for the information received from its awareness function. No one has ever been able to prove this wrong. Every time it's ever been checked out by someone who decides to use these ideas, it is always seen that everything that X does is always appropriate when seen in the long run. Now, many times we look at it and we say, God, how stupid. And then 3 years later we look back and say, oh, I get it. So apparently this is a pretty smart guy. Because a lot of times we look at what X does and we say, oh, that was stupid. But he has his own little way of looking at things. We just say, here's what's going on. And X does what's appropriate. So some people have called X infinite intelligence. Apparently this X thing has a lot of different attributes. That's why we call it X, to remind ourselves, no matter how much we know, we probably know very little. Okay? Because it's got a lot of different attributes. Now, if I look at this little picture that is given to us to describe the way that we actually function, can you see why a person feels incomplete?
Mm-hmm.
Because 99% of what I am, since this is infinite, I don't even experience. It's not even in my life. And I wonder what's missing from my life. It's called a constant relationship with the Creator of all things, including me. And you can see why the parable would be in sexual union, can't you? It's to remind you that what you really want is union with another being. But I can't do that with another human being. It's a pretty story, but it's impossible. There's some really good reasons for that. We simply cannot do it. There's some wonderful things we humans can do together. But experience union? No way. It's just not possible. I can feel very close to you sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. I can experience great intimacy with you. But I cannot get one with you. Thank goodness, actually. I'm not sure that I would really want that. If somebody came up and said to me, Phil, I can be one with you, I think I'd run like hell. It's like, well then, what will happen to me? I'm not sure I want to be one with you. I kind of like this where, you're separate, but we have a good time. I like this game. I like the intimacy of it. I enjoy that experience of feeling free to be open about things in this life that you know nothing about. If you were one with me, what would be the fun? You'd already know. What would be the point? So I think what we're actually looking for is to be able to experience the presence of this in my life all the time. That, I think, would give me that sense of completion that I long for. And so much of the teaching ideas is about what it takes to change myself into the kind of person who can do that and not just yak about it. Because there are lots of people all over this planet that claim that, don't they? Oh, I have a personal relationship with God. And you look at their lives and you say, good grief. What kind of God is it? And that change is called finish creating me. Okay? I'm unfinished. That's why I don't have that sense of this. Since this is an invisible spirit, I cannot perceive it with any sense that I have right now. Isn't that right? Any more than I can look at you and see the awareness that is in you. I can see its effects and say there must be one there. But I can't look at you and see that invisible spirit inside you that is the awareness part that's doing the show. All I can see is its effects. Isn't that right? The way it moves the body, the way it holds it, the way it holds the facial muscles. I can tell a lot about what it's feeling and what it's doing. Isn't that right? But I can't see it. It's invisible to me. And X is another spirit. So in this unfinished state that I'm in, I simply do not have the ability to experience this, much less feel a close relationship with it so I can say I feel complete. It just isn't in me. The body is not done yet. Okay? Does that make sense? So a lot of the teaching is about doing something that will finish the job of creation that was started. But it's up to you. Now, it does say, of course, that X will actually do it. Isn't that right? But I have to kick it off by saying, this is what I want. X will not do it for me. He's on holiday. I have to say, you can see that even on holiday, he's a pretty busy guy. Since he's sitting here running the whole show still, he just said, I'm not creating today. If you want creation to continue for you personally, you're going to have to say, hey, I want it and I'll do part of the work because I'm taking a rest. He didn't say he was not going to do anything. He just said, I'm taking a rest, okay? So you're going to have to tell me you want to do this. I'm not just going to do it. This is my day off. Okay? The other idea, which I have really already kind of said, is that I believe that I'm already created. Just as I believe that the creation is finished, I believe that I am already created. And that is not true. I am not. I am an uncreated being. Now let me put this to you in nice physical terms, okay? This one is in the middle of writing a book right now. So if I show you a few pages of notes and a few little pages that have been written and I say, here's the book, it's done, would you have a nice laugh? Or would you say, no, I'm sorry, you're still making it. You're still creating it. It ain't done. It's just a few pages of notes and outlines and maybe 2 or 3 actual written pages. That's not exactly my idea of done. You kind of get the point. Just because you're in the middle of being created doesn't say that it's created. Of course there's stuff to show. I could show you things about the book. I got lots of stuff right now. It's not a book, but I have lots of pages of notes and outlines and things I want to say and the way I want to say it. But there's very little of it that's actually written. You see what I'm saying? So the fact that I have something to show you doesn't mean it's finished, does it? Because in life, things are a process. Creation is not an instantaneous act, is it? It's a process of growth. That's why it's called life. The last time I checked, that's what life does. You know, it starts out with some little thing, and it grows from there. But somehow we look at the body, which is the only part that we can see, and it appears to us that it's finished. By the way, it's not. Strangely enough, the body is not even finished yet. But it appears to us that it is with our limited senses, because we're not finished, so, you know, what do we know? There are lots of things that we can't even sense. And so we get this illusory idea that I'm created. And it's not true. It might be accurate to say I'm in the middle of creating myself, but it is not true to say I'm created. I'm actually still an uncreated being. And a lot of what the teaching is about finishing that act of creation, about giving us the information that we need to finish the job. Not that most of us seem too interested. But for those who are, the information is there that says, here's what it takes to finish the job of creating yourself. This incredible being made sure that that information was always available to those who want it. Many choose not to do that. They're quite happy living out their lives in this incomplete, uncreated state. That is fine with them. And there are some who say, this is not good enough for me. I do not want to spend the rest of my life incomplete and uncreated, whether they come up with these words or not. And so they find out that somehow or another the teaching comes into their life to give them what they need to finish. So I've mentioned what the counterfeit of this is, which is that since all we can sense is the physical form, We assume that the creation is done for each of us individually because it appears to us that, so we remain satisfied with having a body. And we think that if there's anything left for me to do, it's to develop skills about living here so that I can become successful. Is that right? And we'll talk a bit in a few moments after I've sort of developed this overview about what successful actually means to us. It's rather amusing. At least I think it is. Okay? But that's what we think finishing the job of our creation means. To develop skills here in the physical world, this place that we're going to stay in, for the blink of an eye. The most transitory thing there is. We'll get really good at dealing with the physical world, which we're going to leave shortly anyway, and say, I finished myself. It never seems to occur to us that this is just like a place to come to finish yourself and that you're going somewhere else. And so whatever skills you get about living on the earth world is very nice while you're here, but what good is it going to do you if you go somewhere that isn't like the earth world? No matter how successful you become here, what difference does it make if you're leaving? It's kind of like somebody who gets really good at sitting in train stations. Funny, isn't it? I'm so good at it I could spend years in the train station. Well, that's nice. Did you ever think about leaving one day? Seeing what's outside? You get the gist. The other illusion that we have that's pretty strong is that mankind itself is finished. This is an individual of mankind, but we believe that mankind's evolution is done. In other words, that mankind has been created. That also is not true. Mankind is in the midst of, in fact, mankind is actually less finished than you are. Did you know that? Because mankind right now is in the midst of building its a form. It hasn't even finished building the body that's going to hold it. It doesn't even know what form to give to its own greater self, which is all of us here together. It's really clear right at this particular moment in history because we're living in a time where there is an incredible revolution in value systems going on, where every few years the value systems change dramatically, isn't that right? We don't know what form to put to life on planet Earth at this point in time, because that's actually the stage of the process that mankind's evolution is in. It is time to create the form for mankind. Yeah.
Does this static system, if we assume that the awareness decides what is true, feeds it to X, that is the creator, and we are constantly changing, in some anomalous...
Well, not just we. Everything is constantly changing. That's... Yeah, what about it? I'm sorry.
Do free will and preordination both exist somehow in this
Nope.
system?
Free will is an unrealized potential in man until he creates himself. You have no free will at this point in time. It doesn't even exist.
Okay.
It's just that simple. And there really is no such thing as preordination at all. It's just a funny story that people made up because they couldn't deal with the fact that they had no free will and they wanted it, so they had to make up lots of contradictory stories rather than just saying, free will is for me potential. It is not a realized fact. I have the potential for free will. I do not have it at this point in time. The closest personally that I can come to preordination, and it's nothing like preordination, is I will say that regardless of how we see things, everything always does the will of the Creator. There is no way that it can be any other way. And that actually has nothing to do with free will. Many people have said that one of the other attributes of this Creator is a tremendous love. Just a tremendous love. And yet if you look at the picture of man and say, this is the way he told us that things work, then if I go out and shoot someone, who actually shot them?
We have no free will. We got to check that.
Whether you have free will or not. Even if I have free will, if I go and shoot someone, who did it? I don't know how to run a body. Even if I develop to the point where I do have free will, okay, and of my own free will, I say, I'm going to shoot you.
Mm-hmm.
Who will do it? All I did was say that's what's true and valuable. X will have to do the job, won't he? So it's very clear that the capacity for free will is here.
Mm-hmm.
He will never, ever say no to anything that you say is true or valuable. The capacity is there, the potential is there, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That is actually an aspect of that love. He will never tell you, no, stupid idea. He loves you too much.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you want to do something, and he will have to do it, that is against his own principles, and he's made that very clear. That's against his principle. He doesn't like it when people do that. Some people asked him, how should we live? And he said, well, you could try not killing each other, and a few other things, you know, that he suggested that we do as a way of living. Isn't that right?
Mm.
And yet, the only way that people can be killed is because he did it. I said I wanted to, but he's got to actually do the deed. So free will is obviously there, the capacity for it. The reason that I don't have free will, I'll show you in a moment, it's because I'm not doing my job of being the awareness function. It's not because it's been denied to me. It's because I haven't finished developing the awareness. Things are set up. Okay. Any other questions or comments? If that thing went off, then that means we've been here for 45 minutes. I think that's a long enough time before we take a short break. Any other questions or observations? I know this is all very, like I said, theoretical and out there. Not all of this can we experiment at this moment, but I am, as I'm going along, making some effort. I don't know that I can demonstrate this one to you. This may take you a while to discover for yourself about where mankind is in its evolutionary state, okay? But certainly, if I can experiment with this and say, perhaps this is a fact, and discover for myself that my own sense of incompletion is because I drew a line right here and said there is nothing beyond that line. This is all that I am. And it's not true. And it makes me feel yucky having done that. Okay? So I can verify this part. So you want to take a break? Good. Questions or comments during the break? Done with that?
Mm-hmm.
To talk about man's evolution, we'll look at the stages that it's gone through so far. These things are a tad confused because of a lot of other forces that are going on. But I can see what stages mankind's evolution has gone through so far. The first, of course, was simply survival. Which means that we did whatever we could to survive. It's called survival of the fittest. And if you get in my way, then I kill you. if an animal gets in my way, I kill it. But that's basically the first stage of man's evolution, isn't it? Anything that gets in my way, not anymore. And then at a certain point, we had achieved another way of life that allowed us to introduce a new thing into our evolution called justice. Where it was no longer, if you do me wrong, I kill you. It said, if you do me wrong, I'm going to hurt you back. But no more than you hurt me. That was the original idea of justice, isn't it? And to some extent still is. Although there are a lot of people who still say, if you hurt me, I think you ought to be killed. So you can see that these things that are part of mankind's evolution, even though justice at a certain point in our evolution superseded survival, there are many of us who still live by the law of survival, isn't that right? But they're at a very low stage of evolution as human beings, individual human beings, one would say. Isn't that correct? That mankind's evolution has gone far beyond where a lot of individuals still remain. And then at a certain point it was said, it is no longer appropriate even to live by the law of justice, or the way of justice. That we're going to evolve beyond that point to a thing called love, which is more properly called understanding. Love is not the kind of thing that most people believe it to be, where you have some warm and fuzzy feeling for somebody. It's really a badly translated word that means understanding when it's used in this sense. Okay? The kind of love that we're talking about is, I understand you. So I don't need even justice from you. This kind of love says, I see that due to your place in the evolutionary scale, you thought this was an okay thing to do. I'm not so sure it really is, but I understand that it was to you. You honestly believed it to be proper. So there's absolutely no reason for me to even want justice from you, because I understand that you're doing exactly what I do, what you think is proper. So this kind of love says, I understand that a human being can only act if they believe something to be right, proper, or justifiable. In other words, no one ever does anything they believe to be wrong. Even though we think that it's true, it's not. There is no way that you can hit someone if you think it's the wrong thing to do, isn't that right? If somebody just arbitrarily says to you, go beat somebody up, you would just say, I can't do that. You would have to tell a very complicated story inside your head, wouldn't you, to make that okay. That's called a justification. Now, if you hit me first, then it's very easy to justify hitting you. Isn't that right? So basically, understanding says, I see that you found a way to justify this. I can see no way to justify doing anything back. You're doing something inappropriate doesn't justify me doing something inappropriate. Okay? That's called the way of love. That is the last stage of evolution that man was given a couple thousand years ago. A little fellow came along and said, okay, justice is over with. We ain't doing that here no more. We're evolving beyond that point. And those of us who are interested in man's evolution will start living love. Okay? There is yet Another stage to man's evolution that is not very well known because it was never made public. It has existed for a very, very long time for individuals, but you can see that man is not even yet very good at doing this, is he? Much less going beyond. Many individuals throughout the history of mankind have gone on to the next stage of evolution for a human being, but mankind itself is still struggling with dealing with this one, isn't it? And that is consciousness, or to put it into a more easily understood word, intelligence. But I don't mean the kind of animal cunning that most of us call intelligent, all right? Which some have more than others. Some bodies are born with more of that cunning that passes for so-called intelligence. I sort of call it smarts around here, okay? Every animal has its own little smarts and uses it to survive to the best of its ability. This is an entirely different thing. It's someone who has actually been transformed by love into someone who can play the game with infinite intelligence. In other words, has enough of a relationship with the source of all intelligence called X. They're a very conscious being. And so when you look at them, all you see is this infinite intelligence acting. You no longer see that individual cunning animal playing the game. You see a very conscious awareness function that is doing its job extremely well. It's saying exactly what's going on with very few illusions. It's saying what is of value with very few illusions. And so what you see is the pure response of intelligence, spirit, X, whatever you want to call it. Because there are no illusions in the awareness itself, or very few. You see, with these ways, it's very easy for me to give an illusion to X, isn't it? I can say, I need to survive, and if you get in my way, it's okay to kill you. I'm living according to this way, and there are a lot of people doing that right now. Apparently some cop just got shot a couple miles from here today. I saw about 8 helicopters hanging out, very close to here. I'm sure when you get home and watch the news, you'll get to read about the terror of Glendale. Okay, there are a lot of people still living by this way of telling X what's going on. There are a lot of people still living by this way. We have to do what's fair. There are a few who are living this way, and there are very few that are living this way. And yet this is the evolution that is possible for mankind and each of us individually. We have finally reached the point in the evolution of mankind that it is very, very difficult for an individual to go through this evolutionary process without seeing themselves in relationship to the whole of mankind. So throughout the ages, folks who talked about these ideas always made it a very personal thing. You do this. Today we can no longer do that. If you want to go very far in this game, you must become involved in the understanding that man himself is evolving and becoming involved in that game, the game of mankind's evolution, not just mine. Now, there's no way that I can make any contribution to mankind's evolution without evolving myself. So we're not suggesting that you run out and decide you know all about evolution and that you're going to do something. However, I'm not certain that it's possible to get very far in this game anymore if you don't see the part of your life needs to be contributing to the evolution of mankind, not just an individual. And of course, if you don't want to get that far, then you can do whatever you like. In other words, I'm not telling you what you ought to do. I'm simply describing some things that have been said to me. Okay? I'm not saying you ought to do this. You can go as far as you want or stop wherever you like. It's not my business. If you want to go far, then that's all I'm saying. That, it's very difficult now without getting involved in the evolution of man as a whole, because X is sort of getting real interested in that right now. He's playing some funny games with it. Have you ever heard the story that when you're in the womb, the body goes through what I believe is technically called recapitulation, where for a certain period of time it has gills and then it loses them and becomes amphibian and eventually takes on the form of a human being. So they say that it recapitulates the evolution of man in the womb. Each of us does that, goes through the whole evolutionary process of the form in a few months in order to create the form. You've heard about this, right? Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, all things are a parable for things in the inner world. Each of us must do this exact same thing. We must go through this very step of evolution. We have to recapitulate, in a sense, the whole of man's evolution to evolve individually. So all of us have learned the law of survival, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, what that is on an individual level. A few of us moved on and decided that justice and fairness was a terribly important thing, isn't that right? We get to a certain point in our life when we want everything to be fair, we want everything to be just. Very few of us have gone to the next step. Isn't that right? And I hope that none of you who are sitting here are still stuck in the way of survival, because I'm not sure I want to... I don't mind taking people from here to here and maybe, from here to here, but I'm not sure I want to deal with this, okay? You go do your justice thing all by yourself, all right? Some very wise and intelligent beings work very hard to get man to take this step. I think we can sort of do that part on our own, okay? These are tough. These next steps are tough because all of mankind has not yet done it, so we sort of have to do it on our own. We don't have a lot of support for it right now because man simply hasn't evolved to that point yet, okay? So we still need someone to guide us on that. Right? Most people can do this. And I suspect that most people are at least making an effort to make this leap of evolution in their lives. Isn't that about right? Maybe not doing it too good because they don't have information that makes it possible. Right? The one who gets to this level discovers that they are able to make a contribution to mankind's evolution as a whole. And it's no longer just about my little life and what I can do with it for me. That I can do that, and I can also say, what can this unique individual that's here do to contribute to the overall evolution of man? Which is the real game going on here. This whole show is actually about mankind as a whole. It's not about the individuals. That's very clear if you think about it. If X were that concerned with all the individuals, then things would be real different, wouldn't it? Everyone would be doing this. Obviously what X is really concerned about is about mankind. Now that does not say that he doesn't love each of us individually and will not do everything that we ask of him. It just says that his attention, quite clearly, is on man. Okay? Not the individual men and women that make up mankind. Okay? questions or comments about that? Okay, I'm going to walk away from theory again for a moment and start dealing with something practical. But I did want to at least, I didn't mention one little idea that's rather interesting. Again, this is something that human beings are aware of, even though they don't quite know what to do about it. And so it, like most of the rest of the teaching, has been counterfeited into something absolutely useless that we do to occupy our time rather than evolve. And that's called find a society that will be utopia. This is called the evolution of man. Man's proper evolution, according to what we've been told, is to find some way to create a perfect society where no one will want for anything, where everything will be lovely all the time, and everyone will lead beautiful, wonderful, productive lives. What they're producing, I have no idea. I guess the ability for somebody else to do it tomorrow. After all, we've already said that reproduction is the highest glory that man can aspire to. So I guess that's what you produce, is the possibility for somebody to come and do the same stupid thing tomorrow. And that's our idea of the evolution of mankind, isn't it? To find that perfect government, that perfect society, that perfect way of living here where everyone will be happy all the time. Good little sheep. And of course, to do that, you must lose your individuality. Is that not right? Can you see that? That in order to create that perfect world, you must fit into it? That we're creating not a perfect place for people, we're creating a perfect society for people, which means you have to fit it. So you have to give up the most precious thing that you have, which is your individuality. The odd thing in the evolution of man from X's point of view is that you actually glorify your individuality. Because if we look back at the picture of man again, which we're going to do for considerable time tonight, the awareness function is still a part of X. It never broke off, did it? It's still part of its creator. It's not separate, as we imagine. What is true is that by being in a physical body, the distraction of the senses is so great that we no longer experience ourselves as still being a part of the Creator. Isn't that right? All we can pay attention to is the sensory stuff that's going on all the time. And the stuff that is very, very subtle that's going on inside of me, I simply cannot even pay attention to. I'm not developed enough to deal with the gross, outrageous bombardment from the senses and these more subtle things at the same time. It takes a tremendous development of the consciousness. But we're still together. I never broke off. I'm not a separate created entity. I'm actually a little fragment of X that's being given the opportunity to develop itself into a very wonderful thing. What? We don't know yet. Where the hell was I going with this? There was something I got lost. Ah, yes. So, from X's point of view, the evolution of mankind is for this unique aspect of the Creator to develop itself fully, to actualize all of its potential so that it can contribute to the game of creation. So you're actually asked to be a unique individual. You're expected to become the unique individual thing that you are as fully as you can, which is real different than man's game of us all fitting a mold. Okay? So to contribute to the evolution of man as a whole, you have to become yourself completely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the contribution comes from, is some unique talent that only you have. Because this part of X that is you is different than all the other parts of X that's everybody else. It's some unique thing about the Creator that's been incarnated into this particular body. It has some little thing about it that is completely different from everything else. So there's something that only it can do. Thus, man aids X in the creation of the universe, which is not finished yet. Okay? Before I get off onto some specific stuff, you kind of get this odd way of looking at things. I admit it's a little odd. It's not exactly what we've been told. But I hope that if you can keep this in mind, that it may make the journey of creating and completing yourself a little bit easier by saying, I see it in relationship to what's going on. I'm not going to get lost in it. And believe me, there are billions of ways to get lost in this. Okay? In other words, I need a direction, an aim that can keep me on target. It is a very difficult thing to do, creating oneself. It takes tremendous work. And it's quite specific. It's very hard to talk to folks about it who haven't tried it yet, but it's a very specific thing. And it's not anything else. So it's very easy to get off on some other thing and think I'm doing it when in reality I'm not. Okay? And actually go back to the way that I've always lived, but I've learned to think about it in a new way, so I think I'm actually doing something different. So I'm hoping that maybe this will give us a way of seeing things that keeps us on target, that keeps us understanding the direction we're going in. Okay? So it will hopefully make it a tad easier to do the work that it takes to create oneself. So, I may refer to this again as we go along, just to keep it in perspective, but I don't know that for quite a while I'm going to make it quite this clear, this overview again. I just want to make sure that you really understand it. Any questions, comments? One of the other things that we have real trouble with is that we do not understand the forces of creation. We know nothing about them. And so, by not understanding them, we make our lives unbearable. Because unfortunately, one of the forces of creation is perceived by us as the most horrible thing there is. And we want it out of our life. And yet if it actually left my life, I might as well forget even being here. There would be no point. So we spend all of our life's energy trying to get rid of one of the forces of creation. That has become the entire purpose of most people's lives on planet Earth, is to get out of their life one of the forces that X has put into motion in the universe to allow the creation to occur on an individual level and on a universal level. And we want it gone. Okay? again, we can see a parable to this if you know anything about physics. One of the things that's known is that when you get down to the very smallest place that we can deal with at this point in our understanding, you do not find what we believed we would find. We believed we would find two forces because that's what we believe in, isn't it? We believe that to create, you generate a cause and you get an effect. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
That permeates every point of view that we have towards living, is the belief that creation exists from two forces. Isn't that right? And it's not true. You ask any physicist what they've discovered, and they found there are four forces at the heart of all things. Okay? Now these forces permeate the entire creation, because they are the forces that were used to do the creation, and they're still here, they're still present, because the creation is still going on. But we only see the first one and the last one, the cause and the effect. We don't see the middle two. Okay? And we hate the second one. I'm going to talk more about these forces of creation later, but I am going to point out where the second force that we know nothing about except in quantum physics, we know nothing about it in a personal level, in our own lives, this force of creation that is always present, thank goodness, so that I can develop and create myself and actualize my potential. We see it as disturbance. The way that we see the action of the second force of creation is that it comes into my life and makes everything into a living hell. It comes along, and no matter what I do, something always comes along and disturbs me. Isn't that right? No matter what you do, sooner or later, disturbance will show up in your life. Isn't that right? That is our experience of the second force of creation. Now, later, like I say, we'll put words on this and try and understand what it really is, but I think we need to look at the way we see it right now before we even try to understand what it is. And the gist of that is that since I came from a place where there was no disturbance, isn't that right? Called my mama's womb, which was this lovely place where disturbance never happened, from my point of view. It seems to have disturbed her a lot. But from my point of view, it was great. Isn't that right? I was never hungry. I was never cold. I was never hot.
You were always wet.
But I didn't care. You're right. I was never disturbed. I didn't even know that bodies had needs. Isn't that right? Everything was supplied before I needed it. So I didn't even know there was such a thing as getting a craving or a desire. It was a lovely place. And then I come here, and here the second force of creation is very active. And I'm constantly disturbed. And so each one of us made a decision right about the time of birth, which was that the purpose of my life is to regain the non-disturbed state. In other words, to resist the second force of creation and try and get rid of it. Now, purpose is everything that I do. That is the purpose for my life. It is no longer my purpose to evolve into a created, completed being. My purpose is to get rid of the second force of creation. So I actually don't want to evolve. I want to remain the cripple that I am right now. Now, it's only a cripple if it isn't growing, isn't that right? If it's growing, then you cannot call it a cripple. To call an infant a cripple because it can't walk yet is stupid, isn't it? But if that infant says, I'm going to stay the way I am for the rest of my life, the rest of my time on planet Earth, then I start to call it a cripple. Isn't that right? I don't want to become responsible. I don't want to have to walk around. I want everybody to do like they're doing now and just bring it to me. With no effort on my part. Well, now this person has become a cripple, haven't they? They took a glorious thing, which is growing up and developing, and turned it into a terrible thing. Because they decided not to grow. Okay? So everything that a human being does, every single action that they take, whether they realize it or not, and of course they don't, is an attempt to bring about a state where there is no disturbance in my life. Every time disturbance comes along, I look for a way to get rid of it. Isn't that right? That's what my life is about. I have forgotten, in other words, why I came here, what I'm doing. And I decided that the purpose of my life is to get rid of the forces that are here to allow me to grow and develop into a created, completed human being. Okay? And we develop some ways of doing that. It's called surviving. Each of us is given, without charge, the way of survival, okay? We all do that just naturally without even knowing we're doing it. The first one is that I make a decision that it is important to have my way now. Because my way would be to be non-disturbed. This is the way that I'm going to get what I want out of life. To say, if only I had my way now, then I would have what I want out of life, which is non-disturbance. In other words, I could go on being a cripple, and it wouldn't matter. Everyone else would take care of me. Kind of like the infant that says, I don't want to walk. Okay? And the way to get it is to complain. Now you can see that this is a survival decision for a child, isn't it? If the child didn't complain when it was disturbed, it would die. Because it can't do anything for itself. It can't tell people, I'm hungry. It doesn't speak the language yet. It can't say, you know, I think I might die if you leave that safety pin stuck inside of me, you know, because it kind of carries these little germs, and I'll have to, you know, I can't just nicely say that. It's got to just let out a yowl, so you try and figure out what's going on. Isn't that right? So this is called a survival decision, isn't it? And as part of the game, X creates infants' bodies with a very unique ability. And that is the ability to make a sound that drives adult human beings nuts. Isn't that right? Only infant children can make this sound. Have you noticed that? There's nothing else on planet Earth except a few other things that sort of remind us of it's like squeaking your fingers on a chalkboard. You're lucky I don't have one. But they can make a sound that is guaranteed to grate on the nerves of every adult human being around. Isn't that right? So complaining works for them. It drives us insane, and we immediately rush over there and find out what's wrong to shut them up, because it disturbs us. And so our purpose comes up and says, I must stop this disturbance. That doesn't mean we don't love them. I'm not saying that we don't love them. That's not the point. But you can see that this is a perfect survival decision for a child, isn't it? Except, thank goodness, we all lose that ability a very short time later, and complaining stops working. Isn't that right? You complain and everybody just says, would you shut up? A friend stopped by, in fact, earlier this evening, who is one of those people that is constantly complaining. We all know them. They never grew out of this. Not that many of us have. We do it, but most of us do it, in nicer ways. But this person is always complaining about everything. And every so often I just say, would you stop complaining? Please, for 2 minutes, you're driving me insane. And they kind of tone it down for a little while. We can't do it for very long. But it does. It just, after a while, you just want to choke them, to stop them. Isn't that right? It don't work anymore. It doesn't get you your way. But we're still living by this way of survival. We have not evolved beyond that point, have we? And after doing this for a certain period of time, this infant awareness that only has the potential to perceive the facts and only has the potential to put proper value on the facts. You see, that's the main reason why we don't value this force of creation. It does disturb me. There is no doubt about it. The second force of creation is quite disturbing. But because I am uncreated or incomplete or unfinished, I'm not very good at valuing things that are actually extremely valuable. If later on I find out that this is the force of creation, then I can begin to look at that and say, wow, this is the most wonderful thing in my life, even though it disturbs me very much. This is beginning to develop now, isn't it? It's seeing things properly in perspective of the way things are, and it's learning to have a new way of valuing things. That's called growing up, which most of us have never done. Okay? But it's quite understandable that in its infant, incomplete state, that it would make a lot of boo-boos. It's just not very good at doing its job yet. So I'm not putting anyone down for doing this, because as I say, each of us must recapitulate this. Okay? Just as the physical body had to do it in the womb, each of the awarenesses for its own growth must recapitulate the growth of man's evolutionary process. So we all go through this. It's absolutely essential. The question is, will we ever move on to the third step? Each of us has done the first and second. It's a gift that's given to you. Because this is where mankind's evolution is right now, is on working on this. So this has been done as far as man is concerned. We have evolved beyond this point. So this part of evolution is just given to you as a natural gift. This you have to work for until man evolves to the point where that comes naturally. Then everyone will have to work for this. As it is, we now have to work for both of them. And as I say, the transition from the third to the fourth right now seems to require seeing what we just got through talking about and making a contribution to man's overall evolution. But at any rate, we then make another decision based on this infant, unrealized ability to see what's true and valuable, and we look around and we say, every time I complain, pretty much, somebody does something about it for me, so I have rights. And it does look that way, doesn't it? I have the right to this. I'm entitled to this. I'm entitled to be taken care of. And it is important that I stick up for my rights. Because if I had all my rights, then where would I be? Not disturbed. So it's important that I have these rights and that I make sure that I keep them, and that if anybody ever tries to take them away from me, I will stand up and immediately, and very violently, most of the time, assert my rights. Okay. This is the law of survival. It gets pretty violent, doesn't it? And yet the silly thing is, I don't actually have those rights that I claim to have. The word right means something that I am entitled to that cannot be taken from me. And I have no such thing. What do I have that cannot be taken from me? Okay? I don't even have a right to be alive. Much less all the other things I imagine to be my rights. But I still am living by this way of understanding things, aren't I? Which is very limited. It says, the way to have a good life is to go around constantly asserting your rights and making sure no one takes them away from you. And all it really does is create tremendous conflict with others, doesn't it? Every time I assert my right, I've actually taken something from you, which is your right to do what you wanted to do. So unfortunately, the only way I can have my rights is to take away your rights. So we live in a competitive, violent world because everyone is playing this game. Now, a person who lives only by the law of survival, which around here we call A, is the part of us, the part of the awareness function that lives by the law of survival, okay? Someone who lives only this way is a very violent person, aren't they? Because they see that the way to get what I want, which is to be non-disturbed, and of course you're constantly disturbing me, or at least a lot of the time, is to go and confront you and complain to you about how miserable a person you are because you keep disturbing me, and tell you what's wrong with you and demand that you change and stick up for my rights that you've taken away, which is very violent behavior, isn't it? So each of us is sort of forced to create new decisions on what we call the B side of man, which is the way of justice. And this says, if you want to be non-disturbed, it is important that I please others. Because when I please them, they stop disturbing me. That's exactly how we were kind of conned into making this decision, isn't it? If you don't stop disturbing me, your parents said, I will disturb you until you please me. Isn't that right? All of us got that. Didn't all of your parents do that at some point? In fact, if you've got kids, you probably did it to them. Isn't that right? I would. I don't want this little violent monster living with me. Of course I'm going to teach them another way of understanding, which is please others, and they please you back. I mean, that is the concept here, isn't it? That if I pleased you enough, justice says that you would please me back. You would stop disturbing me. You would do things to make my life more comfortable. Of course, it doesn't work too good, because I kind of like you pleasing me, and I don't particularly want to please you, so as long as you're willing to please me, then hell with you. So as long as we live in a world that has no understanding, the way of justice doesn't work too good, as we're well aware, isn't that right? We have not really reached this level yet, and this isn't working real good. It's better than going around killing each other, but it isn't exactly a workable way of living, is it? But now I am in conflict, inner conflict. I've been split down the middle. And I can't do them both at the same time. So even though I have two ways of getting what I want, they're in conflict, aren't they? It does not please you when I complain about you and tell you what's wrong with you and stick up for my rights. So now I get real confused. I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I try to decide how to get what I want, I don't know what's right. because I'll always have at least two answers. One from this side, the way of justice, and one from the other side, the way of survival. And one says go out and take it, and the other side says no, 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 you get it by trading something of equal value. Isn't that right? And so this little war goes on inside my head all the time about which one to do. And so I get further fragmented, and I have to create another thing inside me that we call the mind or the ego, which around here we call the chooser. And what happens is that all these ideas go through the awareness and talk to the chooser and say, I know how to get it, I know how to get it, and the chooser sits there. We experience that as constant thought. And the chooser has to figure out which one is true and valuable so that we can tell X we're going to do that. So I am in, at this point, a less than enviable state, am I not? All because I refused to experience the second force of creation. Isn't it funny? I decided to buy the story that happens on planet Earth, that I'm finished, that I'm complete, or that if I feel incomplete, it just means I haven't found the proper mate, and that we all know what the game of life on planet Earth is about. It's about becoming a productive member of society, so we can work on to the day when we have the perfect utopia. And we're all busy in the midst of that denying the force of creation that would allow us to do something much more interesting than any of that. Yes, ma'am?
So, if we were, it's not the experiencing of it and the reporting that I don't like this. It's the fact that you think you have to control it.
You're trying to actually stop it. You're resisting it.
Right.
Okay? You're trying to stop it, and it cannot be stopped. So it destroys you.
Right. Right. It's the fact that you're trying to stop it,
Right.
not that you haven't. Not that you look and you go, I don't like this.
No, of course not.
It's the fact that
Many
you
times
think
I
you
don't
must
like it.
stop it.
I'll admit it. I don't always like it. But I do see it as valuable. Because it's what allows me to create something. Whether it be me or anything else in the world that I do. It doesn't say I have to like it. It just says don't try to stop it. Okay? And it is probably better if I can actually learn to like it. Because that shows a very high degree of development of the valuing function, that I can not only say this is disturbing, but say I like being disturbed. That is a very high degree of evolution of the valuing function. It's begun to see something in an entirely new way and value things in a way that it would be considered basically being human. Isn't that right? What do you mean you like pain? You like things that bug everybody? Well, yeah, I think they're really wonderful. I'm not saying one should be there. That's not the point. I'm just saying that that would be a very high degree of evolution of the valuing part of the awareness, which right now is very underdeveloped. It exists mainly in potential. It's not very good at valuing things. Okay? But it would be a higher degree of evolution than the way we are now to say, I don't like this, but it's okay. I will not try to stop it. So you're absolutely correct. I'm just pointing out further, not saying that what you said is incorrect. You're absolutely correct. One who can actually do that and not just say it as a little story in the head, but actually see this disturbance and say, this is what is helping me create. And even though it bothers me, it disturbs me, I don't want it to go away. That would be a much more involved awareness function than most. And as we'll see as we go through some more of these ideas, and those of you who've heard them before know this is true, this attempt to resist the second force of creation actually destroys you. So not only do you remain incomplete and uncreated, you actually destroy yourself by trying to stop the process of creation. And again, if you consider it, it makes perfectly good sense. If you look at this lovely parable out here, if a plant decided that water was the most terrible thing there was and said, I'm never going to drink, would it grow or would it simply die? If I won't allow to come into my life what I need to create myself as an evolved, growing being, then I will not only not evolve, I will die. Careful when you leave. They're having weird fun over there. If you see any people running down the street, just, like zoom off. Don't stop and find out what's going on. Okay? I think this is as far as we're going to go with this tonight. It's getting kind of late. We'll finish it up. There's much more to this than what we've put up here so far. Not a lot, but we've done about half of it at this stage. This is all stuff that I can check out. I can see, I can begin a new kind of thing where I attempt to look at self and understand self. In other words, I can begin practicing the third level of evolution. Because isn't that the way that anybody does anything in this world? When you can't do something, you practice it until it's real. Isn't that right? That's how I learned to play the piano. I didn't sit down one day and say playing the piano would be good and toss off, a little Mozart. I sat and spent years pretending I could play the piano. That's called practice. So I could begin to practice the next stage of evolution, which is to see with understanding what is going on. And I can start to use the teaching ideas to look at the inner man, the inner awareness, and say, is this true? Is this what's going on in my life? Am I living or attempting to live at the same time by two different ways of seeing, which are contradictory? This way says you get what you want by just going out and beating everybody up until you get it, and if you got to kill them, well, fine. And this way says, no, you do it by trading something of equal value. You don't just kill them to take what you want. You give them something of value for it. And you can't do them both. Is it true that all I want in my life is to be non-disturbed? See, these are all things that I can begin to look inside at what's going on and say, is this true? A lot of the other stuff we're going to have to leave as opinion for a while, isn't that right? But this I can certainly begin to look at. Okay? I think we can certainly see at least that these things exist on planet Earth. We may not know whether that's truly man's evolution or not, but we can certainly, I think, look out there and see what's been going on. And saying, when we look at the people who claim that they have higher ideas for man, they've all sort of talked about these things, haven't they? I mean, it's very clear in the Judaic-Christian thing. I mean, at a certain point, they made up all these damn rules, didn't they? And said, you must live by the law. That's where they switched over to the way of justice, isn't that right? And then at a certain point, another man came along and said, justice is okay, but let's try to live by understanding. So it's very, very clear in some places, but I guarantee you, if you look into it enough, you will see the same thing repeated over and over everywhere. That anyone has said, I have some ideas from a higher intelligence. Okay? And this I can certainly verify for self, and that's exactly what we must do for these ideas to work. And I'm hoping you can get some understanding of why that is. You're actually practicing the next stage of your evolution at this point. By attempting to understand yourself, you're practicing the next stage of your evolution. At a certain point, it won't be practicing anymore. You will have evolved. Then maybe you can practice this, the fourth step. Okay?
So you practice by seeing,
With understanding.
by seeing yourself asking A and B for their opinion about how to get non-disturbed,
Right.
and then trying to choose between them, and then letting them tell you how you chose wrong. And so on.
That's exactly right. And there is a certain point, if you'd like, we can talk about this, because I'm sure you've probably experienced it, but there is a certain point where it stops being practicing, and it becomes a very real thing, where that degree of understanding is there. It's no longer practicing, and then we must move on to other kinds of understanding to practice, so that eventually we can say, I have been transformed into one who no longer lives by the way of survival or the way of justice. I now live the way of understanding. I'm a different kind of person than I was when I started this game. Okay. And there are many little signposts along the way that say that one is beginning to be transformed into that, but we want to eventually be able to say, I've been transformed into this. And perhaps even say, I would like to move on and find out what it's like to be a conscious, intelligent being who is making a conscious, intelligent contribution to what's going on here. I'm no longer just in this for me. I am in it for me. Don't misunderstand. It's just that's not all that's going on. Whereas someone who is playing this game and I don't want non-disturbance, really, that's all that's going on in their lives is what's in it for me. The only thing I care about is that everything stop disturbing me. If it looks like I'm being noble, it's because I'm following this, hoping that it'll get me that. I'm following the way of justice, hoping that it will get me non-disturbance. So, repeat it for the people on the tape. We're here right now, but they will be. I just realized they can't exactly see me pointing at them. It's all about me wanting non-disturbance, and I believe I have two ways of doing it. And it's very clear that I don't, because I'm constantly being disturbed. Well, of course, because that is the force that creates. When I learn to stop resisting that force and embrace it and allow it into this life, this stops being practicing. It becomes just the way I am. Okay? Any other questions, observations? Are we done for tonight? Yes, sir.
Are the four forces in any way analogous to these forces of creation?
No. Not in the sense all the things that we look at that are being created or are created, you're seeing those four forces in that particular thing. Okay? So yes, these are the four forces, but in the evolution of man. Okay? This is the first force, this is the second and third and fourth. We're in the process, as I said, of trying to make this one a very powerful force. These two are quite strong right now. We're trying to make this one very powerful in the hopes that one day this one will become a very powerful force as well. Mm-hmm. So it's not finished yet. But yes, in all things that you look at, you can see these four forces. In a human being, the first force is acts. Second force is awareness. Third force is the body. And fourth force is what I do. Okay? Cause and effect. Okay? The first force is the creator, which causes. and the effect is what I do as a human being, isn't that right? But in between, there's two other things that we don't see. And everything that you look at that is either created or in the process of creation, you see those four forces at work.
Change what I was asking is, like, in the unified field theorem, do these relate to those four forces?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. They're the exact same four forces operating on a different level. We're talking about the way they operate on the level of human being consciousness.
Okay.
But yes, they are exactly the same forces. I know they have odd words for them that don't make much sense to us, but that's because they're working on a very detailed level that we don't normally experience. But yes, absolutely. So human beings have known this a lot longer than there have been scientists.
Yeah.
You know how I know this?
No.
There's a very old object in the Egyptian desert called the Sphinx. What is it?
It's a pyramid.
No. It is a being that is composed of four animals. Do you suppose those people were representing something that they knew thousands of years ago, long before there were quantum physicists?
Well, they're in the spiritual literature
All
of any number of traditions.
over the place. But the Sphinx is one of the oldest objects that we know of on planet Earth. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. Older than the writings?
It was built long before the pyramids.
Mm.
Thousands of years before the pyramids were built, to the best of our knowledge. So it's very clear that man has known about this from the moment he arrived on planet Earth, or evolved, or whatever words you want to call it. He's known about this for thousands upon thousands of years. I didn't exactly need quantum physics to tell us. Max told us this a long time ago. But it is kind of nice today, seeing it come out in new ways. It's interesting. We're living in an interesting time right now. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I will talk about this more next week, but if I want to actually use these ideas, I really must begin this practice of looking in self and seeing if I can see what we've talked about so far in actuality. Not as a theory, but an actual perception. I see it. I see the constant complaining going on. I see the constant sticking up for rights. I see the trying to please to get my way. Okay? And I see the conflict that creates. And one day that will bring us an understanding. You get it. Good. Okay. Well, it was lovely having you. And that there is yet another way that we probably will not talk a lot about for a period of time, that is the way of consciousness or intelligence. That we are seeing a teaching that comes from that, from intelligence, a very high intelligence that is much higher than the mind of man, but that we may not ourselves see what it is to be at that point, because we really don't see much for an example. This we might be able to see. It's just a little bit ahead of us, isn't it? But that this one may be difficult to even see, because it is way, way, way down the line for mankind. It's hardly even here. And we began to look at the soul of man last week without calling it that. That it says that man has taken into his soul the first two methods or ways of living that have come about on this planet to date. That we are each evolved naturally, just as the physical body is grown and evolved naturally so that we can live in it. So is the soul grown and evolved naturally to the same level of evolution as all of mankind, which to date is only up to here, survival and justice. The soul, from our point of view, is what might be called the frame of reference or point of view that I have. In other words, as the awareness looks out at the world and sees it so that it can respond to it, it has an entire frame of reference that it sees through, isn't that right? It has a whole picture of reality that says things are like this, so that every little thing that comes along doesn't mystify me. After all, I have to make an instantaneous decision about what's going on here and what the value of it is so I can act, don't I? I don't have 3 years to figure it out most of the time. Occasionally I have a little bit of time, but a lot of times I have to deal with a situation now. And the way that we do that is this other body that the awareness has called the soul, which is the frame of reference of the way I look at everything, so that whatever I see sort of fits into that frame of reference and I can make some decision about what it is and the value of it instantaneously. So I can tell X, here's what's going on and here's my idea of the value of it, and then X can act. Isn't that right? So we need to have this frame of reference that makes sense out of everything for me. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we have what's known as an immature soul, an embryonic soul that sees everything based on the perceptions of an infant that has never grown up. So it is not a developed soul. It is an infant soul. And that we do not know at this point in time how to develop that soul. Is that not correct? That in fact, that infant soul seems to be so powerful that I don't even know how to see anything another way. Every time I look at things, I see through that infant's soul, because in reality, neither I nor the soul, neither the awareness nor the soul have grown up, because they remain stuck in the perception of an infant and never develop beyond that. And that perhaps the way to develop beyond this place is to begin to see that this is where I am. I'm an infant. And see the contradictions between this infantile way of looking at things and what we are told is a more adult or higher intelligence point of view towards everything, and say, well, maybe that other point of view makes more sense than this little one I have as an infant. And that the contradiction between those two generates some kind of force that makes it possible for me to grow up. Okay. And that we have illusions about all of these things. In fact, they are so strong that we never even realize that these are things that are worth looking into. Isn't that right? We have illusions to allow us to deal with all these things. I can go and find the perfect partner for my life, and then I will not feel incomplete anymore. I can become a productive member of society, and then I will not feel uncreated anymore. I am now real. I'm a real person. I can produce something that other people want. And I can get what they've produced that I want. So I become, rather than raw material for the evolution of mankind, for the glory of the Creator, I become raw material for a perfect utopia, which we have been told is mankind's evolution, to eventually evolve to the point where there is a perfect world, where everyone has their place in that world, and we all provide what the others need, and it's just glorious. Of course, we have lots of different ideas of that perfect utopia, don't we? Some say that the perfect utopia would be a hive that is managed by a few little queens that run the whole show, and it all would just be shared, according to the dictates of these few who are special. You know, they're more special than the rest of all the rest that are special too. So they get to decide who gets how much of everything, you know, and everybody produces, and it's just all split up and distributed all over. Everybody shares equally, with the exception of the ones that are a little bit more special, you know, because they should get more. But aside from that, they'll all share equally. And then there's the other idea going on right now that says that we should glorify competition, but give all equal opportunity to compete. That will train each little piece of raw material for this glorious society where all fight and squabble over every little thing there is to have, with equal ability to compete. We'll give them all the opportunity, right? And if some of them don't take the opportunity, well, that's okay. We'll give them a pittance to shut them up. Isn't that about right? Those are the two little perfect worlds that we've imagined so far. They sound lovely, don't they? Wouldn't you like to live in those perfect worlds? Such a lovely world. So we didn't have to think that perhaps that isn't the point. That by looking only at the physical, this makes perfectly good sense. If that's all you can see is the physical world, and you can't see the real world of spirit, then of course that's the way it makes sense, but that is the way a child looks at things, a child that has never developed to see that what has been rumored for many thousands of years here, that there is a spiritual world that is of much higher value than the physical world, is a fact. And that perhaps when I see that spiritual world, the perception of the physical world changes dramatically. And these things that I've been told I should do that are based on seeing only one small part of the creation don't make sense anymore. Okay? So we're going to go on looking at this thing called the embryonic soul of man that allows the awareness to look at the world and make sense out of it and see what it is. And we started out that the first thing that it does is any time something goes against its purpose, which is to do away with anything that might allow me to grow up, that might suggest that I'm still an infant and make me feel bad for being an infant. So it says the purpose of living is to be non-disturbed, because I am constantly given something by life that says, let's grow you up, let's finish the job you started. And that constantly says to me, I'm an infant. And I want to see myself as an adult. So it makes me very disturbed, doesn't it? So all sources of pain tell me, see, I'm not so good at dealing with reality after all. I thought I was really adult, I could handle all this, and I could do all these things, and then some little thing comes along and disturbs me. I go all to pieces and act like a little kid again. And I don't like to be reminded that I am a little kid. So I've made it my entire purpose of living to stop me from seeing things that way. That it will always be non-disturbing, so I never have to see that I am still a child, even though the body has grown up and I've entered into the society of children who call themselves adults. And that the first thing that the infant does is learns to complain. Now, I'm not an infant anymore, at least in a body. Let me write this. So it says it's important that I have my way now. And of course, my way is for everything to be perfect all the time so it doesn't disturb me. And the way to get it is to complain. So what that means is that any time things get disturbing, there's one part of that sees it as such a horrible fate that I will sit and whine and look as miserable as I possibly can until some adult comes over and takes care of it for me. Isn't that right? That if I just looked miserable enough, then I could control you and get you to do it for me for free. I won't have to do anything. And then another one says, well, I know a better way, and that is to see that I have rights and stick up for those rights. So if that doesn't work, sitting around looking miserable until somebody else does it for me, then I will get very threatening and belligerent, and I will scare you into doing it. I will look like I'm just going to make your life a living hell until you come along and do it for me. Isn't that right? I will hurt you terribly if you don't. So you can see that this is the way of survival. It says, I really don't care about you. Your only purpose is to allow me to get my way. That's it. And if I can't be miserable enough to get you to do it, then I'll get threatening instead. And that since justice has been introduced on the planet, there is a contradiction set up to that, so that you don't get too violent with this. Because one that lives only this way is very violent. Isn't that right? These are very violent things to do. So to curb the violence and allow us to survive in a new kind of world where we're a tad overcrowded and there's constant disturbance, we set up the idea that I must please others to get my way. So now I go around doing things that I usually don't really want to do, hoping that if I'm nice enough, which I really don't want to do, I really want to do this. I really either want to look miserable or threatening. But maybe if I get nice enough, then you'll do it for me. You see, I'm still not doing anything except trying to get you to do it for me. And then after a while, we're told that we must do as we're told. Isn't that right? I must believe and do as my authorities tell me. And so now we're given a jillion rules to live by. I learned to live by laws, because that is the true way of justice, isn't it? That we will set up laws about everything. There is a rule about everything, isn't there? There's a rule about where you can go to the bathroom. There's a rule about where you can eat. There's a rule about what kind of pets you can have. There's a rule about how you can take them out of your house. Isn't that right? There's a rule about everything. And this all comes from this fourth decision that says, I must have authorities, and they will tell me how to live, and then I will fit into society, and I will finally get the non-disturbance that I'm looking for. That if I can just fit in and follow all these rules, then I will get it. And of course, that's a really hard thing to do, isn't it? To follow all the rules. Come on in. Well, you can be sorry if you like. Don't bother me. Okay? And that now, this little thing that we're calling the embryonic soul has been split into half. It is in tremendous conflict. It doesn't know which way to follow. Both have equal weight as a way of seeing the world. One says I must live by surviving, that I must be more fit than all others. I must be able to take what I want. Or, if that fails, look so miserable that they'll give it to me. That's another way to survive. Be weak and pitiful. And they'll give it to me. And then the other side says, no, 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 you must follow the way of justice. And you must give something of value to these people before they'll give it to you. And you have to live up to all these rules so we can coexist. You can't just go around being mean and pitiful and weak anymore. You have to be productive. You have to live up to the rules we've all agreed are the way that man should live. And I don't know what to do. So even this little childish soul that has never really developed much is now dying, isn't it? Because it is broken into fragments. It is no longer a cohesive way of looking at the world that says, here is the way things are, here am I in relationship to it, and here's what I'm going to do. It's breaking into all little pieces that are arguing and bickering, and it's really dying, isn't it? I mean, if this body started doing that, if the liver started saying to the spleen, I don't like you, I'm really mad at you, and I'm going to intentionally leak poisons off in your directions, hoping to kill you. I don't think I'd last too long. What do you think? If the body began to be at war with itself. Okay. And maybe the pancreas, or not the pancreas, but the Isles of Langerham will team up with the spleen and say, we'll show you. I won't make insulin anymore. And these horrible toxins will build up in the liver, and they won't be able to attack you anymore. Oh, great. Now I'm dying, aren't I? Because the body said, I don't want to be a body, I'm going to have a little war and see who wins. And there's only one winner, isn't there? Death. That's the only one that can win that game. So this child soul that has never been allowed to grow is in the process of destroying itself. Because if you stop here, all you have is contradiction. The resolution of the contradiction comes here. But if you stop at the way of survival and the way of justice, all you have is a fight. That's what they were for. The way of justice was given to stop the way of survival, because if once you get too many people, we would just all wipe each other out. We'd have these big wars saying my way is better than yours and just wipe each other out. So we had to have something to come along and stop the way of survival. So they intentionally contradict each other. And the only way out of that is to move on. And this resolves that conflict, you see. It says there is no conflict anymore. And that's the thing that we will not do. We won't move on. I think these two things are perfectly reasonable. In fact, we're quite convinced that if we just lived up to the way of justice completely, that all our problems would be solved. Isn't that right? You don't think so? You don't think that's what people believe?
Yeah, I believe it. Some people do, but I don't.
And after living this way a while, I feel pretty bad, and people start telling me that it's because I ought to be different. And I buy that and make a strong decision that I must be different. Isn't that right? To fit into the world, you must change. You must be different. And since I don't feel too good anymore, That makes sense to me, doesn't it? When somebody comes along and says, well, if you were just more like this, or you're just more like that, or you got the right job, or you had the right this, or they had the right that, I buy that idea. And then I spend the rest of my life trying to do that, along with all the rest of these. And everything becomes my fault. Every little thing that comes along that shows me that I am a child and disturbs me says it's all my fault. If I had just been different, that wouldn't have happened. And then a little while later, this kicks back in, and we change our mind and decide that everything else should be different. And now we go back to the way of survival and blame others for our problems and attack them every time something disturbs me. This is the way a child lives, isn't it? There is nothing about this that can be said to be adult. An adult sees something that is disturbing as a challenge, as something to be done. It sees it as a means for its growth. It doesn't try to find some way to destroy the challenge. Isn't that right? So if we leave things at this, I have a dying soul, and a dying body, and a dying planet. Well, I'm sorry, but when I look around, that's what I see. I thought that's what everybody else says, too. They look around at planet Earth right now, and they say it's dying. It's just a matter of time. Pretty soon it's going to be dead, and we won't have to worry about human beings polluting it anymore, because it's going to die. Isn't that right? So that's just the way it looks, if you're honest. That if you leave it with these two in conflict and never move on to the place where that can be resolved, then I don't see how else to look at it. I have a dying soul and a dying body on a dying planet. What else are you going to say, you know?
There's nothing more. That's what's so funny.
Thank God there's a way out. You know, that's about the only other thing you can say. Thank goodness we don't have to leave it at that. Okay? Are there any questions or comments about this so far? Because I would like to maybe talk about the way out. But I think we have to first see that this is the way it is. Because the way out is work. Any questions or comments? In area 1. Okay. Let's take a short break. We'll do something else. Okay, any questions or comments?
Question.
Yes.
Both ways, survival and justice, do they both justify, or is that just justice that justifies?
Both of them justify. Justification of survival is you threaten my survival, so I can do anything I want to you. Perfectly justifiable. After all, you threatened me. I mean, these days, the whole concept is kind of ridiculous, because most of the time you don't threaten my survival. Survival is now peace of mind. You threatened my peace of mind. You disturbed me. So anything I do is justifiable. It upset me. But one of the things that we want to really make clear is that this is, at this point, as far as mankind has evolved. So that's the way it is. There's nothing good or bad about it. I mean, you can certainly see that it's good that we introduce this conflict into the world, isn't it? That without that conflict or that contradiction, we could never have gotten where we are now.
But it's not necessarily good though.
I beg to differ. I didn't say that because I thought it wasn't true. I said it because I think it's true. It's absolutely essential to mankind's growth that he have that conflict. Without the conflict between survival and justice, we would not exist. We would be extinct.
No, but what I'm referring to is more the development of the modern world. Is that necessarily good?
Why not? Just because you don't like it, because it doesn't please you?
No. Maybe because I was driving down the road today and saw the smog.
So?
That's a product of our modern society.
So?
So, it forces people.
So?
It will stimulate to kill you.
I already said that.
Nothing is done.
That was the last thing I said when we left here. If it's left at this, and you have a dying soul and a dying body on a dying planet. I never contradicted that. Why should I say that's not good?
No, I'm just saying it isn't necessarily good.
No, you're not listening. You're saying. Let's look at it another way. Just what do you think is going to get man to take the next step of evolution? If this worked, why would we move on? So what you're calling bad, because it disturbs you, I call incredibly good.
But wouldn't there be another way around it, for example, that we've never thought about?
Sure, let's imagine something different. Let's say I could have done a better job than God did. I could have created things...
No, but I'm saying, like, for example,
Yes.
a silly thing like the subway system, yeah.
Good.
It existed.
Great. Then we'll make a perfect thing so that man never has to evolve beyond this point. I bless man's heart for not doing it well. So now we're going to go back to the idea that man's evolution is not to evolve into a spiritual being, but to create a perfect world where no one has to evolve.
But does that exist? That doesn't exist. Perfect doesn't
I'm
exist.
sorry, I can't hear you. Say it one more
Perfect
time.
doesn't really exist, though, does it? Because to
What's your
someone it
point?
might be very good, but to someone else it's not that good.
What's your point?
The point is being it does perfectly exist.
But that's what you're advocating, and now you're changing your position because I'm saying it out loud instead of in words that are based on personal opinion. That's what you're advocating.
I don't even know what advocate means.
That's what you're arguing for.
Oh, okay.
You're arguing for a perfect world. Where
Yeah,
people
but
do...
it would never exist, though.
Then why are you arguing for it? I didn't start arguing for
No,
it.
I'm not ignoring it. I'm just like saying example, thinking that, is that right?
Ma'am,
Is that wrong?
let's not play with words.
Okay.
I didn't say arguing originally. I said advocate, which is different than arguing, but you said you don't know what that word means, so I did the best I could to put it into words you would get, and now you're going to quibble with me about that word. You are being a proponent for an idea. How's that? Now, can we get beyond this?
I'll shut up.
And look at what's going on instead of quibbling over words? You're proposing a solution. I'm proposing an alternate solution. If you would like, you can play the solution that man is doing, which is what I started out talking about. That's exactly what everyone wants to do, is to say that man's evolution is to find a way to create a world where we don't have to grow up, where we can remain fools, but it'll be okay. And I'm saying perhaps man's evolution is to see that there's something of much greater value than the physical world and grow beyond the point where we are now so that all of these things that you're saying are bad about our evolution today simply become irrelevant. That we grow into understanding. No one with understanding would do the things that we're doing right now. And so your whole argument becomes irrelevant.
I'll go on.
And I see the very things that everyone else says are so horrible about modern life as being the most wonderful gift that a loving Creator has given us, because it says, folks, this isn't going to work. You cannot remain children and expect to continue in existence on this planet. So the Creator is constantly showing us that if we do not take the next step in our overall evolution, we will simply destroy ourselves. And then the whole problem will be solved. There will be no problem. There will be no humans. The alternative is that we can look at the disturbance we've created for ourselves by not moving on and move on. And see that there are two worlds on planet Earth, not just the physical. There is also the spiritual world where real living beings live, spirits live. And that just because spirits on planet Earth happen to live inside of a physical form doesn't mean that that's all that there is. And move on.
Yet again, though, why would the spiritual world be more acute? Like, for example, in certain parts of the world, and they say energies are supposed to be strong in certain parts of the world.
I didn't understand. Say that again.
Like you say, spiritual world and material world. I think in certain countries.
Actually, I said spiritual and physical.
Physical, okay. Spiritual and physical. It seems more. The general awareness of the spiritual world seems a lot more acute in certain countries, in certain places, whereas in others it seems very difficult to grasp.
Crap.
Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah.
It's just crap. All across this country there are people who claim to know about the spiritual world. It's just that they're talking about it in terms that you're quite familiar with. So you hear other people talk about it in terms that are magical sounding because we didn't grow up with them and they seem different.
No, but certain places will always feel as if you're more close to the spirit world. I know, for example, certain places I've been that you feel as if you can almost touch it, whereas you come to another place with different attitudes and it seems a lot more remote.
So that's not spiritual. If I can feel it with the body, it's not spiritual.
It's always more of a metaphor, isn't it?
What's that?
Feeling as you can be more aware of it. Well, it doesn't matter.
Well, it does matter for one simple thing. It says a very clear thing, which I know you're going to hate me for saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Because I figure you're a big lady, you can just leave if you don't like what I'm saying, okay? It says a very simple thing. Don't take from me my adulthood. I don't want to see myself as a child. I do not want to admit that while I believe that I have grown up and become an adult because I can talk about many, many things, that it's not true. And there's nothing I can do about that. If a person is going to argue intellectually rather than going out and checking out for self and saying, this person is saying that they got this from a higher intelligence, that it's not their idea. And I'm going to go see if they're telling the truth. I'm not going to agree or disagree with them. I'm just going to go find out for myself. And there's nothing I can do. And that's the hardest thing about this, is that we have to relook at self and say, I thought I'd grown up, and I was wrong. And I know that that's where this is going to really stick in the craw, okay? But there was a very famous teacher once who said, you must become as a little child again to enter into the gates of heaven. So I'm not alone in this point of view. This is the fact. People here become, which is an English translation of a word. We don't even know what the original words were. And they say, oh, I see, so I'm an adult, and I have to learn how to be like a child again. And they miss the point. The point is very simple. You are a child who's pretending to be an adult. If you want to move beyond being a child, you must see that the fact is you're a child pretending to be an adult. Then we can do something. In other words, I got to look at these facts that I have accepted as untrue. I am not incomplete. I'm in search of the mate. That the whole purpose of man is like any other animal on this planet, to procreate. I am not uncreative. I am raw material for a perfect society that has yet to be seen. Mankind is not incomplete or uncreated. It simply hasn't developed the knowledge and the technology yet to live well on planet Earth. But we'll get there. And we live in this dream that these statements are simply incorrect. That I do not have an immature soul. I have a fully mature soul that I must save from what I don't know, but I've got to save it, you know. And we don't see that these are all lies. They're just lies. I am incomplete. I'm incomplete because the senses that come from the physical world have completely distracted me from the spiritual world. I have ideas about the spiritual world. I have no experience of living there. I've had experiences that I call spiritual. I don't even know if they are. All I know is that they're unusual experiences because I've never lived there long enough. I've had many people at various times say, I went and I stayed in this really nice place. You know, and I just, oh boy, they live so much better there than we do here. And I say, well, yeah, how long you were there? Oh, 3 weeks. Then what do you know about living there? You just visited. Try moving there. Tell me what it's like to live there after a couple of years, okay? Then I'll believe you that you know what that place is like. But if you've done any traveling at all and then actually moved somewhere, you know the difference between visiting a place and living there. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
They ain't the same thing. Huh?
No.
No. So having a few experiences in the place that I visited doesn't mean I know a damn thing about what that place is like, does it? Because I never lived there. And the senses are just so distracting. They make this physical world seem so overpowering that at best maybe I've had a few little experiences from visiting there. That doesn't mean I know anything about the place. I never tried living there. That I am not a created being that simply has to learn how to live within society. I'm actually uncreated. That's what a child is. It's the seed of something. I'm not a created being. It's so hard for us to accept. But I already grew up. But I didn't. Because the part that is me, which sees what is true and the value of what is true, still sees that through a child's eyes. So the inner man that lives in the inner world, the spiritual world, is still a child, regardless of what the adult body has done. It sees exactly as a child does, because it still has the soul of a child. Life became so unpleasant to me that I stopped growing up. And I'm left with the soul of a child. It was never developed beyond. I do not see mankind's evolution at all. I'm not even interested. All I care about is what's in it for me. What am I going to get out of this? I don't see that the real work that is going on planet Earth is not about individuals, it's about man. Mankind as a whole. And that because I am a part of that thing called humankind or mankind, that I can benefit from the show. If I play along and do the evolution that man will one day go through in thousands and thousands of years now, because it's known. Higher intelligence said, I'll tell you what man's evolution is. And any of you are free to take that evolutionary path, because if you do, you will contribute to mankind's evolution. That a person who gets up to this point looks around and says, I'm going to contribute to everyone else's evolution. I'm glad that I got the benefit of this. And I'm going to do something to contribute to everyone else's evolution. That I literally got the benefit of this. It was not done for me. It was done for all of us. And I got the benefit of it. And I feel so grateful for that. That I say, what can I do to make some contribution back? Because this wasn't for me. But the Creator cares so much about me, loves me so much, that it let me use forces that are here to create mankind for my own personal use, to develop me. And that's how much He cares about us. He said, they're here, I'll show you how to use them. You can go way beyond man's evolution if you like. You can go as far as you want. I don't ask anything in return. You don't have to pay me back or nothing. You can just do it. It's kind of tough to do that, though, and not feel a certain amount of gratitude and maybe want to pay something back. But I'm sure there are some who never have. They just said, well, thanks, went about their business, and that's fine, too. Because love doesn't demand anything in return. It just says, here it is. So, we have all looked at one of the forces of creation and said it is bad, and set about trying to keep it from my life. And that's how come we never grew up. As a child, I didn't understand one of the forces of creation, and I said, it's a bad thing, and I don't want it. It's horrible. It disturbs me. It makes me very uncomfortable. It pains me. It hurts me in all different sorts of ways, and I don't want it. The problem is, by trying to stop it, you destroy yourself. When you attempt to stop this one force of creation that is provided by a very loving being to allow you to grow up, what happens is you destroy yourself. Okay. The way out of this is to maybe accept the ideas from higher intelligence and check them out for self, not believe them, but look around and say, can I see that perhaps this is true? That I feel incomplete, not because I haven't found my soulmate yet, my other half that will make me feel so warm and fuzzy all of the time, so we can have lots of babies together. Or is it because I'm not in touch with the spiritual side of me? This incredible part of me that we call X, because we know nothing of it. I'm just out of touch with it. I have stories about it, and I do all sorts of arcane practices to try to experience it. But it's not a living presence in my life. It's not something that is just always with me. And that's where that idea of incompletion comes from. That I can check out and say, am I uncreated? Do I see through the eyes of a child? Do I not see to grow and develop as a living human being? It is not an evil thing. It's just that I don't have the eyes of understanding to see it that way. So the way out is for me to see these things that a higher intelligence has told me and make an entirely new decision. If it hasn't been made already. Some of us have already made this decision. It just took us a while to get to a place where the information we needed to do it exists. And that decision is very simple. I want nothing more than to be created. That's the only thing I want. I want to be real. I want to grow. I don't want to remain the way I am now. That's all I want. I don't care where it takes me. I don't care how hard it is. All I want is to grow up and be able to one day say, I'm not a child anymore. I'm not uncreated. I am a real living being. That I've taken my place in the Creator scheme of things that says, I want others to create with me. I don't want this to be my show alone. I want folks to do it with me. I want to develop you until you are able to be part of the creation with me. That this is our creation, not just mine. That's all I care about. And then there begins to be a powerful force in the life that is no longer content to be a child, but is content to see self that way. It is okay to be a child. I just want to grow up, which is what any child wants. And I'm willing to go through a period of time of seeing that I'm a child and I can't be expected to do the things that an adult does. And that's the way it is. The beginning of that is to start re-looking at this thing. There's another part that we haven't looked at, which around here we call the chooser, that has to listen to these two ways of trying to survive, called survival and justice, and pick one since they contradict to tell X that I'm going to do, and that this one is the one that experiences all the misery and conflict of these two conflicting ways of looking at things, okay? And to start to have compassion on this embryonic soul and say, look, this is the way it is here, okay? We haven't developed beyond this point. One day, it may not be this way. People won't have even an embryonic soul that's in conflict, but this is the way it is now. And it's okay, and start seeing it with understanding. I understand that you find the world a terrible place that attacks you all the time, whether it be emotionally or physically or intellectually, and that you're just trying to survive. But what I want to do is live spiritually. And to do that, I first have to understand the way I see things now, before I can even begin to see things a new way. Because if I took in new ideas about things, this old frame of reference would immediately contaminate it back into the old way of looking at things, wouldn't it? Any new idea that came in would just become another way to either survive or to act out justice, until I see that so clearly that I can actually take in a new idea. And that the truth is that the worst thing that could happen to me right now would be for someone to tell me a new way of seeing things, because I would turn it into poison and kill myself with it. I would see it as a way that I and everyone else ought to behave according to 5 and 6, you see. 5 would tell me I should behave that way, and 6 should tell me you should behave that way, and it would never become an experience that grew the soul to the point that it says, this is the way I see. I don't have to try to behave that way. Yes, ma'am.
after I left last week, I went off and looked at the purpose of living being non-disturbed. Enough to where a lot of that stuff just kind of stopped happening. And I had 3 just glorious days. I mean, it was just wonderful. and then I just, who knows what happened. I went bye-bye again. And after a couple of days, I realized, I don't know. I don't know. I can't say what happened. I just don't know. But anyway, after a couple of days where I went, you know, this feels like the same old shit again, then they spoke up and said, now, Laura, here was your chance to be a really good spiritual person for a whole week, and you just blew it.
You
so they
blew it.
I mean, they took all this wonderful thing and they like tried to fit it into a number here, you know. So anyway, 3 days me, 4 days them, you know.
Yeah. So my first job of learning to live by the next stage of evolution is to have understanding for self and for the way that everything is seen now. And say, this is just the way man has evolved at this point. And what I want to do is understand that so well that when someone says, here's the next stage of evolution, I can hear it. It won't just be another way to pretend, another set of rules to live by. It won't be something to please people with. It won't be my right. It won't be the way everyone else should behave. It won't be something for me to complain because I don't have yet. I will simply say, I get it, and be about it. Right now, I can't do that. This frame of reference says, this is the way it is. And we go through that a lot. People come up to this thing and they say, yes, but here's the way I see it now. It's like, I know. What's your point? I know this is the way I see it now. That's why it's called the frame of reference. Okay? I would like to allow that frame of reference to grow into a spiritual understanding, to see things in a whole new way. And to do that, the first thing that I need to understand are the forces of creation. I need to do this. We'll come back to this in a bit. I think to make sense out of something that is so misunderstood, I really have to see what those forces of creation are and see why I have considered one of those forces to be such a horrible thing and thus remained a child. And it works very simply. It says that when the universe was created, it was built around one law. And that law has been called balance, although that's like for shorthand for people who understand it. The real description is everything is in motion, and the motion is about moving towards balance. Therefore, it is never actually in balance. Otherwise, it couldn't move. If the universe ever actually gets into balance, there's no place it could move because that would move it out of balance and it would have to move back again, you see. That would be stasis. So the real description of it is that it's in constant motion. Everything is constantly changing. And the motion is always toward balance. But the very motion towards balance puts it back out of balance. And then motion moves it back towards balance, and that puts it out of balance. So we get this incredible place where anything can happen, but it doesn't quite fall apart. Because it's close enough to being balanced that it's okay. And the way that that was done, to create that kind of state, was to build everything out of 4 forces. And we only see the first and the last. We call these cause and effect. We don't see the middle 2. And it's the second one that upsets us so much. Except we don't even see it as part of the force of creation because we believe there are only two forces. But imagine how difficult it would be to create a universe out of two forces that have to be in perfect balance all the time. If one of the forces changed, the other one would have to change exactly the same amount to put it back into balance, wouldn't it? You get four forces and they can all adjust themselves. Isn't that right? It becomes much easier to keep things moving towards balance this way. The truth is that we couldn't have such a thing as cause and effect. It would be impossible to implement. So the Creator came up with this idea that says everything that is created will be made out of four forces. The first of which around here we call initiative. Simply to remind us how it works from our point of view. On other levels than human effort, this has other names. But from our point of view, we could call it initiative. And it says that everything starts with an idea of what I want to create. And then once I have the idea of what I want to create, I do something to bring it about. Isn't that right? That is first force. The moment I act on the idea that I want, I have put out initiative. I put out first force. And the universe comes along and does a very nice thing and provides me with a little thing called resistance. It says, no, you're not going to do this. That's what second force is. Second force is equal and opposite to whatever initiative or first force that I put out. It just stops me dead. That's it. You ain't going to do this. This is the way the universe was made. And if we look at our lives, we see that it is full of resistance. Isn't that right? My life is full of things that are stopping me from doing what I want. And I hate it. It bums me out. It ought not to be that way. It ought to be easy. It should be simple. And so we don't see this as a great gift. That without this, we would never get to what we call the effect. Because this is the way things are done. We say that the second force of creation is a terrible, disturbing, evil force. And so we invent devils that go around outwitting our gods. Isn't that right? There are very few religions on this planet that don't have two forces pitted against each other. One of them wants to do this wonderful thing and the other one is equally brilliant and goes around figuring out how to undo it all the time. That has nothing to do with the Creator. It has to do with our perception of the forces of creation. You see, there is no God or devil. It's just that we hate the second force of creation. We think it's bad luck. We think it's evil. It's people doing terrible things to get me. We think it's misfortune. All these things. And so we try to stop the resistance. We try to get rid of second force. And we make it the entire purpose of our lives to never experience resistance, second force. Because it hurts me, it pains me, it makes me unhappy, it disturbs me. And therefore, never grow up. That second force is provided so that I can be created. And I've made it the entire purpose of my existence to stop it from happening. Because I don't know how to see value in this. The way things work is that these two work on each other. About like this. Kind of like, what do they call that? Something or other exercise?
Isometric.
Okay. Where you look like you're doing absolutely nothing. Isn't that right? Both arms are putting out equal strength, so it looks like absolutely nothing is going on, but you're developing your muscles. You see? And as those two forces interact, they create a third force that we can call the form to understand it. That is the resolution of this conflict, isn't it? Now the conflict is unnecessary. We have a form. We have something physical now. We have a manifestation in the physical world of what was originally just two forces buttoned into each other. We now have something created. See? And these three forces together, as we use the form, and of course get resistance to doing that too, together create the fourth force, which we call the result, which is what you actually wanted. Most of the time it's not the form that we want, it's what we do with the form. If I decide to create a business, it isn't the business that I want, is it? It's financial freedom, money, the contribution the business will make, whatever it is, okay? But it's not the business itself that I want. I mean, I don't go to this incredible effort to create a business and then say, great, and walk off. Because what I really want is what I do with that form, isn't that right? Now, a few people get paid just to create the form. But most of the time, we're not interested in the form per se. It's what we're going to do with that form. And so we get the four forces. And the wonderful thing about this is that these four forces then interact with other four forces and other creations so that your form can become my resistance. So you create something that would be wonderful for you, and it's in my way. So what is your third force is second force in something I'm doing, and so we get this incredible universe where everything is interrelated. Every force that looks like one thing here is another force here. See? My result could be your form, and so on. That if a person understood this, that this is just the way things work. Resistance is not something to get upset about, it's something to be overjoyed about when this is understood. Then it becomes possible to be created because I stop resisting the resistance in my life. What? Oh, just waving at me. Okay? So again, here's another thing that I suddenly have to begin to see in a new way for all of this to make sense, isn't that right? There's a lot of things that to even begin to deal with this that I got to look into before I even get concerned about what can I do. There's a lot of things I have to look at. So to really allow yourself to become creative, you have to begin to activate what is right now in me only potential, which is to value things that are truly valuable. Right now, the only thing I value is not getting second force. And I would like to see things in a new way, the what of things in a new way, so that I can one day say, you know what, I really like second force. I value it very highly. And then, damn, things just start taking off in life. Okay? But it takes some work to see this, doesn't it? Much less learn to value it. This isn't going to happen overnight. I've got to go out and check into this and say, hell, I don't know if this is true. This is just some weird guy standing up here writing stuff on a board, and actually see it for myself. And start to see this is the way it works. Every time I act, something comes along to interfere. And yet it gets done anyway. How is this? Now I think I overpower these evil forces arrayed against me. But if I really pay attention, I start to see this so-called overpowering in a whole new way, and I start to see that it's actually the way that these interact that generates the form. And again, we can go back to a business and see it quite clearly. let's imagine that we have two people, even though this is impossible. It's theoretical anyway, right? It's all hypothetical. It means nothing. Who have exactly the same skills, exactly the same understanding, exactly the same knowledge, two identical people, okay? Just pretend. And the only difference between them is that one has $1 million and the other has 500. Other than that, they're identical people. They both have exactly the same desires, okay? And they both decide that they're going to create a certain business. Can you see that the resistance for those two identical people will be entirely different? That the one with $1 million will have entirely different resistance than the one with $500, isn't that right? They're both going to get the job done somehow. They'll both find a way to work through whatever resistance comes up for them. Do you imagine that their businesses will look the same?
No.
They have exactly the same understanding. They both will say understand the four forces, but because they have different resistance to work with, the form will be different, isn't that right? Because resistance and initiative together create the form. But they may well eventually have the same result, even though the form is different, isn't that right? Assuming that they're both very good businessmen, they may both one day have $1 million companies. But they're going to have to go through an entirely different form to get to that result, isn't that correct? So if we really look, we can see these ideas very, very easily. It's just that it takes some work to start looking with understanding instead of reacting with our old way of looking at things that says, here's the frame of reference I have. The world is a vale of tears. Where I must compete to get mine. And then some of us say, but I don't want to. I don't want to compete. I want to be spiritual. And say, can't we all just love one another? But there's that whole frame of reference that is all based on seeing resistance as a terrible thing to be gotten rid of. And I must now begin to see that this is just one of the forces of creation. And that the Creator cares a lot about us and has provided more than enough second force to allow us to do what we want to do. Isn't that right? No matter what you want to do, it always supplies second force to make it happen. Isn't that right? But usually what we do is we get upset about this and we start to fight with the second force and we stop doing what we set out to do. And that ends up not generating the form that we wanted. That actually destroys you. It's very destructive to the person doing the initiative to fight with second force. We'll go into that later. But it is a fact. I don't expect you to believe me because I haven't explained it, and I accept that. But it is a fact. We will go into it, okay? But right now, I think it would be of great value to take these simple ideas and see if I can start to see through this frame of reference. Just try it on, see how it fits. That it says that this is a frame of reference that comes from understanding, and I check it out for myself. That I am incomplete, I am uncreated, I have an immature soul, and I'm living at a time when mankind itself is not yet created, that it's only partially created. That's why I say immature soul, because this soul is at exactly the same level of maturity as all mankind. Okay? As as mankind develops, human beings will come into this world in an entirely new way. They will each be given a soul that is at the same level of advancement or evolution as all mankind. At this point, the inheritance of mankind is given to each of us is unfortunately inner conflict, because we have the first force, which was simply for us to survive long enough to create mankind, and the second force that came along and said, stop that, because if you do it too much, it'll destroy you. And it said, start creating justice instead, which is resistance to survival. And we have yet, as a race, as an overall thing, to get to the form, which is understanding. We're just barely beginning to see the form come about. In the last couple thousand years, this form called understanding has just begun to come about, and so we see it in the society now, that we're having terrible problems with our idea of justice. It's not working anymore. It's falling apart. We're starting to see through the eyes of understanding that people really are not to blame for what they do, because they're subject to those tremendous forces that so far we can't deal with, called heredity and psychology and conditioning. And these people that are doing odd things are not to blame. They're ill. But we can't quite bring ourselves to go all the way yet. We still want justice. We can't quite bring ourselves. We're just in conflict over it right now. The form is just beginning to peek out and say, you know, this don't make sense. That's where man is at right now. It's neither right, wrong, bad, or anything else. It's just where we happen to be born. If you'd been born 2,000 years ago and somebody talked about understanding, you'd think they were insane. Now people think you're insane if you talk about what it is to be truly conscious. They think, you're nuts. But you talk a little bit about understanding, they at least can begin to see what you're saying. That's not too far out. Unfortunately, though, because we have a very small amount of it, we have a tendency to imagine that we have more than we have. It is just barely peeping out after 2,000 years of people working at developing this for all man. It's not here yet. The form is just starting to show up. And all that's happening in the physical world that's a reflection of this inner transformation man is going through is just a sort of conflict with the old idea of justice, that we're not real sure that our idea of justice makes sense anymore. But we don't want to give it up yet. Okay? But that is mankind's gift to each of us, that we inherit all that mankind has experienced in his time here. That's what we get. It's up to each of us to go further. Okay. Are there any questions or comments about that? I think it would be of great value to spend a week just making an effort to see those ideas, okay? I'm incomplete, I'm uncreated, I have an immature soul that is at the same level as mankind's immature soul. And very much at work to see these forces everywhere I look. Because they're everywhere I look. There's not one thing that I can look at that I don't see these forces in. And next week, if you like, I'll talk a bit more about them, but I think it would be interesting. You try. You look. See what you see. And maybe next week you'll say, Phil, you don't have to talk about it. Move on. Okay? That everywhere you look, that's how all things are created. And if that becomes a real experience to me, I may learn to value second force instead of going off in a corner and sulking when it happens, or fighting with it, or trying to please it so that it will leave me alone, or tell it that it ought to be different, or whatever. You see, all the things that the inner frame of reference says the way I ought to do things. And just look at it and say, glad you showed up. Let's get cracking. We got work to do. Okay? Questions, comments, observation? You know what to do?